Nancy Salzman, the co-creator of Executive Success Programs, the workshop that filtered into NXIVM, which had an offshoot that became a sex cult, decided to finally tell her story after she was released from her 3.5-year prison sentence. I've listened to the podcast, I've rewatched The Vow, and I am here to share all of my findings with you. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I try to post about 3 videos every single week on one of these topics, so if any of this sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing to the channel. I would love to have you here. I'm also sponsoring single parents this holiday season, so if you are a single parent needing a little extra help this holiday season, please email me a little bit about yourself as well as your Amazon wish list to letfreshaaron@gmail.com, and hopefully I'll be able to feature you on one of my videos. Today's single parent is Neva. She says, "Hi, my name is Neva, and I have an 8-year-old daughter. While I've been able to supply the necessary items, such as clothes, food, and winter items, on my single income, I've not been able to figure out how to pull out things she may want for Christmas. I truly want to thank you for doing this. It's truly making Christmas so much better for kids who may not have had a great one without this. Unfortunately, the state of the government has really impacted my family this year. Thank you if you see this. It's truly appreciated. Below are both of our wish lists, but I truly just want to make sure my daughter has the best Christmas she can." Thank you so much, Neva. You will find her Amazon wish list down in the pinned comment below, as well as links to all of my sources. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on in. Now, I think I said this forever ago when I first started my channel, gosh, over 2 years ago now, but I would just like to reiterate it for a second. So, as a lot of you know, I have been really fascinated by cults for a very, very long time. But I do have to admit that there were several documentaries and docuseries that I watched when I was in my mid to late 20s. And I honestly felt like I was probably a little judgmental. I thought I could never fall for it. I thought, oh my gosh, how do these people really believe in things like this? How do they get sucked in? I had a lot less empathy for those survivors and those honestly victims of cults. That is until I watched The Vow. I think I watched The Vow the first season when it first came out like 3 times in succession because I genuinely was like, I would have fallen for this. It looked so great at first. I mean, you go to a self-help weekend and learn about yourself, and you learn how to utilize NLP tools to help reprogram your mind and feel better about yourself and get more confident. I think there was a time in my life that were I to step into a NXIVM workshop, I would have been hooked, line, and sinker. I would have been sad. It was the first cult documentary that really helped open my eyes and see, like, wow, anyone is susceptible to groups like this. Anyone. And I think that NXIVM did such a great job of, unfortunately, of bringing people in because the gateway into getting involved deeper in the cult was through something that seemed very legitimate, seemed to work, and was pretty much run by a very well educated and passionate woman. Now, Nancy was in season 2 of The Vow, but she was released from prison recently and decided to finally go on a podcast to share a little more detail about her story. Nancy decided to go on the Reality Life with Kate Casey podcast, and it was a very well done podcast. You really do get a glimpse into Nancy's life and how she got involved with Keith Raniere in the first place. After listening to the podcast, I went back and I rewatched The Vow, and I can't help but feel really, really heartbroken for this woman because at the end of the day, I really do believe that she thought she was doing something good. Now, we talked a little bit about this in my Allison Mack kind of summary of her podcast, where I discussed, on one hand, Allison is a victim, but she went into perpetrator territory. And obviously, the same thing happened with Nancy Salzman. I am certain that whistleblowers and other survivors will have a really difficult time, showing empathy for Nancy because to them, she was, the second in command. She had to have known about the insidious things that Keith was done, and she probably did certain things that were abusive and harmful to people, but it seems like she really thought she was doing the right thing. And that's the thing that's so dangerous about cults is they really do start to turn off not just your instincts, but also they kind of reframe your whole sense of ethics and morality, especially since Keith is constantly saying that his idea of ethics and morals are to be held in such high regard. This doesn't excuse anything Nancy did, just like I said in my Allison Mack video. None of these circumstances excuse what they did, but hopefully they bring an understanding as to why these terrible things happened. So, in this podcast with Kate Casey, Nancy shares a little bit about her upbringing. And I think hearing her upbringing will bring things a little bit full circle because her mother worked in a temple. I'm pretty sure that Nancy is Jewish. So her mother worked in a temple, and people would apparently go to her mother before the rabbi. They really looked to her as this, maternal figure who was supportive. She led us to believe in the podcast that the rabbi or the higher ups at the temple would get kind of jealous that Nancy's mom was usually the first person people wanted to, reach out to for support or questions because, that's the rabbi's job. However, her mother found this role very, very challenging and would get very, very stressed out and would take all of that stress out on to Nancy. She was also very sick. She had dealt with chronic pain her entire life. And Nancy was very passionate about trying to help her mother. She wanted the best for her mother. And I think that seeing how ill her mother was really did drive her passion and intention as she went on into her adult life. Now, as for her father, she didn't have much of a relationship with him, but he was a fantastic salesman. According to Nancy, he could sell anything to anyone. So I think that with this passion she has to help people who are like her mom, who are dealing with chronic pain, coupled with skills that a salesman had, she was probably primed at a young age to become the Nancy Salzman that we know, building up this massive company while utilizing psychotherapeutic tools to make people feel better. So, because she wants to help people with chronic pain, she ends up going to nursing school. And this is where she meets her husband, Michael. It's kind of an interesting story. Apparently, she set her sister up with Michael first, and they went on a double date. And then Nancy was like, no, 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 never mind. I actually like Michael more. And kind of decided that she wanted to pursue him instead of her sister. And then they would end up getting married. And they would actually move from Connecticut to upstate New York, where she would eventually meet Keith Raniere. Now, her husband was very encouraging to Nancy. Nancy was not just involved in nursing, but because there were so many people around her or that she witnessed have chronic pain that doctors couldn't necessarily help, she started to go a more holistic approach and went the psychological route. So she became very, very fascinated in how utilizing different psychological tools could help people deal and potentially even heal their own chronic pain. And the thing about Nancy, when she talks about this, you can tell that she is incredibly passionate and she really, really believes in the work that she does. You can tell that she just wants to help people and wanted to help people. If you can believe it, she still has coaching clients. She still works with people, which when I first heard that, I was like, wow, she's allowed to do that? But we're going to get into the distinction between ESP and NXIVM as a whole as we move forward. But I am very surprised that she is still able to, be a practicing psychologist or whatever she calls herself these days. But her husband did encourage her to open up her own practice and work with people with chronic pain, utilizing some of those psychotherapeutic tools that she had been studying. And one of these tools was NLP, or neuro linguistic programming. She would actually end up meeting the founder of NLP. And if you are not familiar with what NLP is, it's a combination of behavioral and cognitive psychotherapy that utilizes linguistics, which is like the ways in which one speaks, to help people kind of reprogram their brain to deal with challenges. But she would also begin to dabble in hypnosis. So, with all of her training combined, she is really trying to figure out different modalities within the psychological field that can help different people, which I think is admirable. I would hope that any therapist I go to is this passionate about getting educated on how to help people. But it does start to paint this picture of how ESP was created, and honestly, how and why someone like Keith Raniere probably would have targeted Nancy Salzman. She has all of this nursing understanding, so she understands the physical body. She has all of this psychology education, so she understands the mental body. And she's practicing NLP, linguistics, and hypnosis and getting people to a certain place psychologically that apparently is healing. Now, her practice begins to grow, but so do some tensions within the home. And she would end up divorcing her husband, Michael, but she would stay very close with him and even his future wife. So, her ex husband, and his new wife would spend holidays together and spend time with each other. And so throughout this period where she's operating her own practice in upstate New York, she keeps hearing this name, Keith Raniere. People keep saying, oh, Keith Raniere wants to, get to know you. Keith Raniere wants to meet you. And at this point, he was running his consumer byline company, which was that MLM that ended up, getting sued, I believe, and it just went down in flames and failed spectacularly. But Keith had heard that Nancy Salzman was teaching these linguistic psychological practices at other companies. And when he was running Consumer Byline, he was like, she needs to come teach my salespeople how to sell better using all of her technique. And it's really weird because this is a theme that goes on throughout Nancy's relationship with Keith. He doesn't like actively go seek people out and go meet them. Like if there's a celebrity that's at an ESP course, he doesn't want to go fly out to meet them. He demands that they fly out to see him because, he's the smartest guy in the world and he's just like so important. Give me a break, dude. But so Nancy keeps having people, patients, clients coming up to her and being like, this guy, Keith Raniere, he really wants to meet you. He really wants to meet you. And she was like, I keep hearing that. I keep hearing that. So after Consumer Byline kind of like crumbles to the ground, he decides that, okay, well, instead of this MLM, I'm going to create a brick and mortar health food store. And he calls it National Health Network. And on Thanksgiving, I feel like a lot of things that transpired in Nancy's life happened on Thanksgiving. And this video is getting posted on Thanksgiving, so it's kind of kismet in a way. But it would be at Thanksgiving dinner that Nancy is having with her ex husband and her ex husband's new wife. And his new wife is like, you need to come with me to meet Keith Raniere. He wants to meet you. I'm going to bring you to his health food store for a meeting. Don't make me look bad. And Nancy's just like, oh, okay. So she ends up going to this natural food store, which apparently had like a cafe inside of it. And there's a woman, I believe her name is Tony, who first sits down with her and basically just like sells her all these health products. And Nancy's sitting there thinking, like, I'm not really into this stuff. I don't really take vitamins. I'm supposed to meet this guy, Keith, but there's no sign of him anywhere. Except she does notice this kind of scruffy looking guy who's wandering around this health food store not wearing any shoes. But then this man starts a conversation with Nancy and is asking her, why is she here? What's going on? It's nice to meet you. And she's like, yeah, I'm supposed to meet this guy, Keith. And he's kind of laughing about it, like, oh, that's me. So then they sit down and they have a full 5-hour conversation. And, I think when you meet somebody that has, similar theories to you or intriguing thoughts, or is passionate about the same things as you, it's really easy to get sucked in. And so I can only imagine Keith is like buttering her up, listening to all the knowledge she has. And then he's like, well, I have something for you. I want to build something regarding human potential. So, he's using all these buzzwords that Nancy loves to hear because she is passionate about human beings living up to their fullest potential. So apparently, he gives her homework and he gives her a single piece of paper to study. And apparently, this piece of paper has the 9 levels of human performance on it. It really reminds me, and a lot of people allege Keith Raniere, anyways, derived some of his ideas from Scientology, but it really does remind me of like moving up the bridge, moving up the striped path is what ended up happening in ESP/NXIVM. These 9 basically like pillars of how human beings reach their ultimate potential, which is basically like a really fancy way of goal setting. So initially, Nancy's thinking we're going to create something that is going to help people grow to their fullest potential. So she's hooked. She's like, this is what I've been looking for. This is what I want to do with my life. This is incredible. And she's also intrigued by Keith. And he kind of seduces her in a way, not just into working for him, but also into his bed. And they did have 2 very brief, intimate encounters before he cut it off, but not without saying, you need to devote your entire life to me and you can't be in another relationship unless you've worked through your other issues regarding relationships. I mean, we have to remember that Nancy was in a semi vulnerable position. She was divorced, she was now a single mother, and she was trying to build her client roster and meet people who were as passionate about what she wanted to do as she was. So then she meets Keith, and he's like, we're going to build this thing together. And she just commits. She doesn't make a vow or an oath, but she believed in what they were creating together. So she put everything she had into it. She would not date for 20 years. I don't think she's even started dating now after everything that has happened. I mean, she was in jail for the last 3.5 years. So Keith is really seducing her intellectually. And he says something that I think sets the tone for their entire future working relationship. And I think he knew what he was doing because basically he starts setting up using like scientific jargon that Nancy is going to be the face of what they called the technology or the ESP, the self piece of the program, using, hypnosis, neurolinguistic practices, and psychology to help people believe in what they can accomplish and achieve, right? But Keith was going to get the opportunity to kind of like stay back. He wasn't going to have to be the one everybody went to. Basically, he wasn't going to have to do any of the work. He was the face of the entire organization, but she was the mouthpiece, right? She was the expert. She was the subject matter expert. She created this thing, and Keith would utilize it to his benefit. At this meeting, he asks her, what makes a science? And she's like, I don't know, you tell me. And he says, well, it's reproducible and teachable so that somebody else can teach it and understand it in half the time. And he says, I'm going to have to teach you things so that you can go and teach everybody else. So this is what I mean. He's planting that seed for Nancy to be the one at these ESP workshops in the videos, creating all the modules, doing all of the work while he sits back and just gets to monetarily benefit from it. I mean, it's no surprise that his first company was a frickin' MLM because people at the top don't have to do any work. They just make it so everybody else struggles and everybody else works hard and the money runs all the way up the chain to him. But he's essentially trying to create the same thing here, but in a more meticulous way, it seems, a much more manipulative way. Now, something that Nancy really was passionate about was that ESP, Executive Success Programs, that was her company. And that company was not implicated in DOS, which was the sex cult, sex sorority. And NXIVM was the umbrella under which all of these other groups and organizations kind of protected. But all of the money and the financials would float into NXIVM because NXIVM was the company. But ESP, Executive Success Programs, was the tech, was basically Nancy's baby. And something she reiterates in the podcast and also in the Vow season 2 is there was nothing wrong with what I was doing. There was nothing wrong with ESP. It was NXIVM. ESP happened before NXIVM. ESP happened before the sashes. ESP happened before we were calling each other Vanguard and Prefect and Proctor. And she said she didn't like any of those things, but she felt like she had to just kind of compromise for Keith so that she could continue doing her work and seeing how it was affecting people positively. And something I heard her say multiple times is there were 150 people involved in DOS, but 18,000 people that went through the ESP program. And where are all those people who are singing our praises or speaking up for us? Now, I know it sounds like I'm 100% on Nancy's side right now, okay? I am not. I am trying to show both sides because I believe situations like this are incredibly nuanced and we need all of the information before we can create an actual opinion or understand what exactly is going on. But Nancy does say, like, it was not my thing that was the cult. My thing wasn't implicated. ESP wasn't bad. I think what she is unable to reconcile, and she really does break down in the documentary, and it does break my heart for her that, like, if she was doing something bad, it breaks her heart because she truly, truly thought what she was doing was good. And so perhaps this is a coping mechanism to block her from like really recognizing what she did and the part she played in it. But I feel like she has yet to fully come to grips or doesn't want to come to grips with the fact that ESP was the gateway into NXIVM. Keith Raniere was using her and her intellect and her research and her execution of all of the material to pull people into an enterprise that had an underlying insidious intention. I don't think Nancy fully recognizes that that is the vehicle by which Keith used to pull people in. He put her at the face of it to make it look like it wasn't insidious, to make it look like it was empowering. But then he would infiltrate a lot of the curriculum or create other curriculum that would then be attached to NXIVM and ESP, like Jeunesse or DOS or the men's group. And then he would start teaching his very damaging rhetoric, specifically regarding men, women, and relationships and the age of consent, and even what defines abuse. Now, Nancy did say that there were many things that she disagreed with, but she felt like she couldn't speak up because he always threatened that she would never see him again if she ever spoke out against him. Or if she pointed out she didn't really like the way he was relating to certain people, he would say, "You don't understand the work that I'm doing with them. If you question my techniques and my tactics ever again, you will no longer be involved." So I don't know legally what Nancy really had ownership of. I mean, they were business partners, her and Keith, so I'd imagine, there would have been litigation if she did try to like branch off and go do her own thing. But I mean, she was involved with Keith and NXIVM for 20 years. I mean, it was her child, it was her career. So I think that it would have been very, very difficult just simply due to the sunk cost fallacy for her to leave because she's truly believing that she can make things better and thinking probably like, oh, well, I've never built a huge organization from the ground up before. There's bound to be some internal conflict. I'm the one that's best suited to manage some of this conflict. So every time there was an issue, she was the one, basically like the PR person that would have to go deal with it. If there was a woman having an issue with Keith, she would have to go talk to them and try to mitigate that at Keith's request. And this is kind of another moment where she breaks down in the documentary because she's like, I just would go in and talk to people, but I wouldn't have the full context of what was going on. I did not know about the terrible things he was doing to these women, but they would have a problem and I would have no context and I'd have to go in and counsel them or do an exploration of meaning, which is effectively, it's like NXIVM's version of talk therapy where person having the issue is guided into discovering that the reason they have the issue is because of them, not anything outside of them. So they constantly take the blame for things that they do not need, and nor should they take the blame for, like being abused or feeling an intuition that something's wrong or feeling resistance to some of the teachings and practices. The EM would make them feel guilty for having that feeling, think it's hindering their growth and thus the growth of humanity, and then fall back into a shell of themselves and continue needing to pay for NXIVM courses and activities. Now, something that's been very bothersome to, I think, a lot of people is the involvement with her children. She had two daughters, one of which got very, very involved in not just NXIVM, but DOS, and her name is Lauren. Lauren got involved right away because after college, she came back home and lived with Nancy, and Nancy was like, "You got to come check out what I'm doing." And Nancy said that Lauren was so good at the tech. She was so good at running ESP courses. She was a great recruiter. She was a great teacher. She had a lot of empathy, compassion. She just loved what she did. And Nancy said she's the best teacher. But soon Keith decided he was going to get in the middle of this mother-daughter relationship. He would tell Lauren that Lauren was being a parasite on Nancy, basically like squeezing energy from Nancy, because Keith wanted Nancy to be about the business, for the business, and just focus on the business. Because if he kept Nancy tired, hungry, overworked, stressed, confused, she wouldn't be able to see all of the things that he was doing on the side. And this is according to Nancy's theory. And on the other hand, Keith is telling Nancy, Lauren is too codependent on you. She shouldn't be living with you. You have a very inappropriate mother-daughter relationship. So he basically convinces them to separate more. He puts a wedge in between their relationship. And now we know that it was partly because he wanted them involved with Lauren, which he would, and she would be one of the first line slaves in DOS. Now, Nancy says that there were multiple times where she felt these points of contention with Keith and she really would want to leave. But someone else, predominantly Kristen Keith, who I spoke about in my Lost Woman of NXIVM video that you can watch here if I remember to link it, but I will try to link it down in the pinned comment below as well. She said that Kristen Keefe would always kind of lure her back in and try to get her to stay and just say, like, Keith is stressed. Keith is working hard. He doesn't mean to take it out on you. Kind of making up all these excuses for him so that Nancy, whose brainchild was ESP, which was the gateway into the cult itself, that it was the thing that looked good on the outside that pulled people in. And once they got way too entrenched, way too involved, it was too late. ESP was the gateway into the cult. ESP was the good thing that pulled people into the deeper, scary thing. And Kristen Keefe consistently would convince Nancy to try to stay in the group. This is obviously all according to Nancy. Now, something chilling that Nancy said was, although she didn't know it was DOS that was pulling Keith's attention away from her, she did say that when she looks back, around the time that she believes DOS would have been starting, she felt this sense of relief because Keith wasn't controlling her life as much. So, to get a better idea of what her day to day looked like in NXIVM, was she would wake up and she was expected to call Keith right away. And if Keith wanted to come over to her house and have her make dinner for him, she had to let him. And then they would have these long conversations about the day, what the goals were, etc., etc. But apparently, when it came down to creating curriculum, he was like impossible to find. And so she would be tasked with creating this new module or curriculum for something that was going to be happening that very afternoon. And he wouldn't meet up with her or link up with her until like 5 minutes prior to the workshop. And so she's trying to write the curriculum while the workshop is running. And the facilitators of the workshop keep being like, Nancy, we need the next step. We need the next step. And she'd be like, not yet. Keep them doing this, because she was tasked with writing this new module or this new syllabus for the course while it's happening because she can't reach Keith. And then she's having to like process it all with the attendees of the workshop. And then after that, if these attendees want to work with her further, she is like opening up her own time in her own home to help further coach these. So she was doing these like 18-hour days, she said, with barely any sleep. And he was just like so controlling. He just had her under watch, lock and key all of the time. I mean, she wasn't even allowed to have friends. She said she didn't go on a vacation for 20 years because Keith would be like, "What, are you trying to vacate your life? This is your life's work. You want to leave?" And she just didn't know how to get out. And I think he did this because he wanted to find different ways to put Nancy down. Because I think it's the tactic that he used with everybody, where the second you think that NXIVM, the practices, the teachings are working for you and you're getting more empowered, he's going to break you down so that you continue to need him and you need the cult. Because if all of a sudden you feel great and you don't need the courses anymore, he's going to lose money on you. So he has to keep you in. He has to constantly build you up and break you back down, build you up and break you back down. And I do think that that's what he was doing to everyone in his orbit, including Nancy. Because remember, he had a physical relationship with her that he cut off and then told her, do not have any romantic relationships. You can't have friendships. You can't have anything outside of NXIVM. But she's observing him having these relationships with all these other women. And so she says in the documentary that there was this feeling of her just never being enough. He would try to get her to lose weight. And she was saying, if you want me to work at the pace I'm working, I cannot diet. I feel exhausted. I'm already hungry. Like I'm not. And she wasn't a big woman. She said she's a size 2. She was 120 pounds at 5'4", and he just wanted her rail thin like he wanted every other woman. So I think there was this breaking down of her self-esteem so that he could further control her and get her to stay so that he could make her feel esteemed and then break her down. She even said that he never would compliment her privately. He would constantly move the goalpost. So she would achieve one thing and he would be like, okay, now do this. The only time he would actually compliment her was in a group of people, so it made him look good. So I think he was constantly just like breaking her down, reminding her of her place in the organization. She wasn't allowed to speak up at meetings. She discovered he would get really mad and say something to intentionally embarrass her in front of people. And I think that one of the biggest factors that hurt Nancy and her mental health was when he became intimately involved with her own daughter and promised Lauren a child and a relationship that never came to fruition. So I can only imagine that subconsciously, at least, she has vocalized this now, just made her feel less than. It made her feel like, why am I not good enough? Even though she's built this whole thing with him. If she had done it by herself, it probably would have been something completely different. She linked herself to the completely wrong business partner. However, as we know, Nancy's a skilled salesperson. Nancy's a very smart woman. Nancy knew exactly what to say to people to disarm them when there were allegations about NXIVM and ESP. She knew how to calm people's nerves. She would have to answer to a lot of the sexual implications surrounding Keith, but again, she wouldn't have full context, but she knew how to talk. I mean, she practiced linguistics for decades, so she knew exactly what and how to say to elicit the response that she wanted, whether it was to sell a class or get people to stay in the cult or get people to believe Keith. And so when I think about that in context of everything we're hearing from her now, there's still this part of me, despite the fact that I can see a human being clearly in pain, clearly remorseful for what's happened. There's this part of me that can't help but wonder, like, are you still playing us? Because you're a master at words. You know exactly what to say and do to get people to believe whatever you're telling them. But I will say there is piece of her that's very human to me and very honest. And I don't know, maybe this makes me biased, but I truly do believe that she thought what she'd created was something really helpful. And I think that she really had intention of helping people. So I think that learning or reconciling the fact that she maybe didn't directly harm people, but led people to be so harmed and traumatized has got to be heartbreaking for her. I mean, I know for me it would be. If I thought I created something great and was helping people and I was actually people, it would be devastating. But I do believe she was completely taken advantage of by Keith. I think that he knew exactly what he was doing when he approached her. Exactly. I think her life would have been so much different if she had never met Keith Raniere. So we're going to go back to when DOS is like first getting developed, because all of a sudden things start getting really tumultuous within the group. There are some of these like whisperings and allegations and issues happening amongst the women and complaints, and Nancy's kind of becoming privy to it. And apparently people are approaching Nancy and she's like, what's going on? And then Keith has Lauren, her own daughter, approach her and say, DOS is not a big deal. It's just a sorority. It's just like stuff I did in college. Like, there's nothing bad about it. Nancy claims that she had no idea about it until she was watching it on The Vow. All she remembers is that she witnessed Nippy, Sarah Edmondson's husband, screaming at a workshop that they had branded his wife, and was so angry. And when they left the cult to inevitably go whistleblow about the whole thing, Sarah, also in a very badass move, in my opinion, basically de-enrolled everybody from the group that she had enrolled and gave them all refunds. And this obviously angered Nancy, because she's like, well, that wasn't, Sarah's money to give back. So still at this point, Nancy's like hasn't really come to grips with the fact that like she does hold some responsibility for this. This is back before the trial and litigation and everything. And also Sarah calls Nancy and leaves her this voicemail that they show in The Vow season 2. And Sarah's understandably just like so angry at Nancy, because I mean, you have to think about it. Like, from Sarah's perspective, Nancy knew everything that was going on and knew about all these terrible, terrible things. But from Nancy's perspective, she's like, this woman is trying to destroy me and take me down. But then suddenly Keith just disappears, leaves the country, and Nancy says she never spoke to him ever again. Not one time. She didn't even know that the FBI was after him/them. So the level of betrayal that I'm sure Nancy felt must have been enormous. I mean, she's losing her company. She doesn't know where her daughter is at this point. Her business partners fled the country. She's lost money. And now she has lawyers telling her that they're probably after her too. And she finds out that, A, if Keith owned up to all the stuff he did, everybody else would have gotten to go free. But instead, Keith was trying to get other people to take the fall for him. And she also found out that if people didn't start pleading guilty, a lot of people were going to prison, including her daughter. So, to try to save her daughter, Nancy was the first person to plead guilty to the racketeering charge. She did a plea deal. And I think that kind of snowballed into Allison doing a plea deal, Lauren doing a plea deal, etc., etc., etc. So, I mean, to have the second in command basically defect and go against Keith was a major turning point in the trial. What's also kind of heartbreaking, just timing wise, is I believe her father passed away right before she went to prison, but after she got sentenced. And then her mother passed away right after she got out of prison. So, there are a lot of reasons that my heart does go out to her, because she's experienced a lot of loss in a very short period of time. But there was something that she said that still makes me feel very critical of her in the docuseries. And granted, this is before she was in prison for 3.5 years, so maybe her perspective has changed. But she does say that she wouldn't change anything, which was a shocking thing to hear. And I think she's saying that in the context of like what she created and what she built, and how, they tried to patent the way they were utilizing NLP mixed with hypnosis, mixed with all this stuff. But it was just a shocking thing to hear. But it was also heartbreaking to see her totally break down. I think maybe that's one of the things that's more humanizing for Nancy than when you listen to Allison Mack, is because in the vow you really do see her break down. Now, the argument of, is she breaking down because of the guilt and the disillusionment, or is she breaking down because she's, caught in effect? Who's to say? That's, I think, up to you to draw your own conclusions. But I do believe that Keith preyed upon her, targeted her, and really just used her as a tool. And I think that if you were involved in something for 2 decades of your life and you sacrificed having any other relationship, other friendships, basically any kind of work-life balance, it would be really hard to reconcile. And at the same time, I understand people like Sarah and Nippy and other folks who were involved in, being victims of the group, who aren't able to and don't really want to hear from her, speak with her. Maybe things will change in the future. Um, but I'm not sure. But I am curious what you guys think about this and Nancy. Do you really believe her, heartfelt breakdowns, or do you feel like she's still, you know, just using her linguistic skills to elicit, empathy from us? It's very, very curious. And I know I got a little bit of not necessarily backlash from my Allison Mack video, but uh, I'm trying so hard to be unbiased, but I think it's very difficult for anyone to be unbiased with situations like this. I think I'm just trying to see things from both sides, see things as, on one hand, both these women were victims. On the other hand, they both were perpetrators. And I think the betrayal of an entire worldview of you thinking you're doing something that's good, your life's work, like Nancy's life's work, was used for something terrible. And she has, and probably still is, reconciling that. And it must be a difficult, difficult job. So I don't know. I don't know. I feel compassion, but also criticism and frustration and anger and these complex feelings and opinions towards both these women that we've talked about recently. So I'm really curious to see what you guys have to say. Thank you so much for being here with me. If you spent your Thanksgiving with me, thank you so much. And I just really hope that you guys are all holding your loved ones close and really asking the right questions and making observations, because honestly, any of us could be an Allison Mack, any of us could be a Nancy Salzman, any of us could be Sarah Edmondson, any of us could be, Nippy. It's very easy to fall into groups like this. And I think the second, like I say in several videos, the second you think it'll never happen to you is when you're probably the most susceptible to groups like this. So please stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Thank you guys so much. Bye.